can see your screen. Can everyone see his screen?
Yes, we can.
Cool. All right, and just yeah, let me know when we're ready to record it.
Justin, you can go right on ahead.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. So here is the governance workshop today for Codeless conduct. So a little bit about me. I formerly come from traditional finance with no real technical background. I ended up leaving my job in 2020 just to kind of explore DAOs more fully. So I became a full-time contributor over at Index Co-op on the Treasury Management Working Group, and also helped out with some of their growth initiatives there. That spun out to Llama DAO, which is a treasury management service DAO focused on providing treasury management services to DAOs across the space. So through them, I got to work with like Aave on their treasury grant, Pool Together on tokenomics and capital structure grant, and Gitcoin doing like an investment philosophy proposal. And then also like did a lot of writing in the space when I first came in, so helped out at Rabbit Hole doing some intro writings like how to use Uniswap, things like that. Also some personal writing on my own Substack, and today I am currently a research analyst over at 1KX. So this workshop, we're just going to kind of briefly go through like what is a DAO, what is governance, both like more theoretical and then the practical application of it. So how do you go about reviewing governance proposal processes, how do you do proposal writing best practices, and give you some ideas of like different things that you can do in the space either as an individual or as like a kind of like a service DAO yourself. So let's dive in. DAOs, what are they? They're organizations of individual nodes that cooperate to achieve a goal using blockchain, smart contracts, and token-based governance. The word DAO itself stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And so what those words mean, just to kind of further elaborate there, decentralized comes from DAOs relying on decentralized infrastructure, such as blockchains and smart contracts, to operate. DAOs use on-chain tokens, such as ERC20s or NFTs, and anyone can join a DAO permissionlessly just by holding these tokens or by participating in their governance or their communities on Discord or Discourse. They're autonomous, meaning the smart contracts themselves that underlie the DAO provide the foundational rule set for how the DAO operates. Decisions are automatically executed in many cases by the smart contracts themselves following the outcome of a token-based governance vote. And in this way, they're kind of like almost like autonomous organisms acting based off their underlying rules. And then finally, organization. DAOs are governed entirely by individual members who collectively make decisions on how to operate. These operations are typically proposed by the community and are voted on by token holders. So that gives you a kind of idea what a DAO is, but like how do they operate is kind of the question. So when you compare DAOs to traditional organizations, there's many key differences. One, a traditional organization, is usually operating under an LLC. If you're contributing to a traditional organization, you usually have a manager. There's some kind of hierarchical structure that starts with shareholders of the stock that are able to directly vote in board of directors that then provide strategy guidance to managers, and that flows down to the contributors or workers themselves. Treasury management's usually standardized, and transparency to the outside is little to none. DAOs have evolved over time. Initially, it was kind of governance solely by token holders and a core team dedicated to just kind of addressing those proposals as they came up. This was much more fluid participation, but it was still relatively monolithic. What we've seen today now is under this DAOs 2.0, there tends to be token holders that are delegating some kind of authority to working groups themselves, either authority or even providing resources via grants to working groups that are dedicated to specific tasks within the DAO. So this makes DAOs themselves really modular and extensible. Working groups don't necessarily have to be contributors from the DAO, from the core DAO. It can also be external DAOs like service DAOs coming in and operating as a working group for that main DAO. And to give you an example of how these working groups typically are arranged, you can see here some of the common breakdowns. So for instance, PR, marketing, sub-DAO, or working group would be focused on social media or external communications. There's likely BD teams or business development teams that are doing DAO-to-DAO collaborations or partnerships and producing deal flow. There's always a need for onboarding resources or recruiting or HR. So you can see that these different organizational arms replicate some of the things that we've seen in traditional organizations. But again, the idea is that these can be much more modular. So service DAOs today often come in and help out on some of these things. For example, I mentioned at the offset that I worked for Llama. We would go in and request a grant for, say, Pool Together. We went in and requested a grant to provide treasury services to them. And upon receiving that grant money, we then continue to operate as if we were an extension of Pool Together itself, setting up that working group. And this can be done across a variety of verticals. So everything from recruiting and design, for example, auditing services, legal services, all this is highly extensible arms that can be added to a DAO itself. So we talked a little bit about governance. Would like to dive in further there now that we have kind of a high level of how DAOs are formed. So governance within a DAO is similar to shareholder governance at a corporation, or even governance within like a democratic institution, like a government. And the main difference being that you're using tokens for voting. Voting can be done off-chain, which requires no gas but has less security, or on-chain, which requires paying gas but is more secure. And then governance protocols like Snapshot and Tally or a UI for directly interacting with the underlying blockchain help facilitate this entire process. And communication then is primarily done on Discord or Telegram for informal conversations, and Discourse or a governance forum for more formal discussion around proposals. To give you a little bit of color on what those look like, here's an example of Snapshot. You can see here Gitcoin, Gitcoin's DAO, and there's two different proposals listed here, a Ratify Foundation one and a Gitcoin Radical Public Goods Alliance proposal, both of which are active. If you were to click into one of these, you'd come to this tab where you can see both the outline of the proposal, and keep in mind this is cut off, the proposal is much longer than this, but you see an outline of what the proposal is specifically, where it's stored on IPFS, what voting system it uses, the start and end date, when you needed to hold the tokens by, so that's that snapshot, and the results thus far. And then below you're able to see the addresses and how they've specifically voted in that specific proposal. The other most common form of governance discussion takes place on Discourse. So this is where proposals go initially. So you'd post here to be able to see initial feedback from the DAO as a whole. Oftentimes proposals are discussed here in kind of like a preliminary form until they come to an agreement on the final terms, and that's put up to the final vote, which is done in like a snapshot or on-chain. And then a little bit on voting methodologies, and apologize too if I'm going kind of fast, a lot of material. So, but voting methodologies, there's a couple of different common ones. The most common today is one token, one vote. So in that methodology, for every one token held, you receive one vote within the DAO. This lends itself to plutocracy or challenges around kind of like the political nature of it. So if you have a lot of wealth, you're able to accumulate a lot of governance power and steer the DAO, which isn't necessarily a good thing. And so to protect against governance attacks, which might include someone coming in and voting to give all the treasury to their address, a quorum threshold is typically included. So that means you have to have so many tokens, so much percentage of the circulating supply vote on a proposal before it is actually passed. So to address some of the concerns around one token, one vote, a lot of DAOs have now been moving to a liquid democracy model. So this is a delegated democracy where the voter is able to either engage in direct participation in governance votes or can choose to delegate their token voting power to a representative. So voters this way, again, are able to directly vote on issues. So if you feel strongly about one way of how a proposal should be done, you're able to still do that, or you can elect to delegate your votes. This helps out a lot with some of the challenges and opportunities in the space, which we'll review here in a second. And then a couple other models. There's weighted voting, which was popularized by Curve, where you take a token and you stake it or lock it up for a set amount of time. And the longer the duration of the time lock, along with the larger the amount of the tokens that are locked, the more votes you receive within the DAO. The rationale being that if you're locked up, you would think more long-term about how governance is done. So you're not necessarily thinking short-term decisions because you have economic alignment with long-term functioning of the DAO. And then there's quadratic voting, which is kind of like the holy grail of DAO token voting models. This one logarithmically relates the number of tokens held to total voting power. So the easiest way to thinking about this is the cost to the voter, which is number of votes. The cost to the voter is equal to number of votes squared. So it smooths the impact of wealth on the voting process. While you do get more votes if you're more wealthy, that diminishes the more votes you make on the proposal. There's still some challenges with implementing quadratic voting. One of the key ones being Sybil attacks, which is if you're able to spin up more than 2 addresses, each additional address that you're voting with essentially receives exponential more voting power because you can divvy up your wealth across multiple wallets. So we have to figure out like some kind of proof of personhood or KYC like process to ensure that voting's fair in that quadratic voting regime. Next, on challenges and opportunities. So one of the primary challenges of governance to date is voter apathy. So voter participation rates are super low in crypto. For example, Uniswap, which has 312,000 token holders last I checked, only have about 8,000 active voters. You could think because crypto is a very incentive-based economy that you would incentivize voters directly, but that likely results in low governance quality. So we need to figure out as a space how do we engage voters and improve turnout. And when they aren't engaged, how do we ensure the DAO is safe from governance attacks and runs efficiently? Because another misalignment that can occur when there's high voter apathy is, and you have a quorum threshold, is that you don't meet quorum even though it's a non-controversial, just basic operational proposal. So you want to make sure people are voting and engaged. There's also the concern around lack of specialized voters. So sometimes voters vote for the sake of voting without having the requisite knowledge or expertise to make an informed decision on that specific proposal. Delegation tends to help solve this partially, but can kind of devolve into popularity contests, where, for example, a delegate that's really popular at one DAO might receive a lot of voting power in another DAO solely because people know who they are. So some questions we'll need to address there is how do we increase the number of informed delegates? How do we reduce governance concentration across multiple DAOs? And how do we ensure voters are able to easily keep up with the DAO so that they can understand what's going on and be able to vote appropriately? Next is governance concentration. So core teams and institutional investors typically command large percentages of the token supply, which means the DAO is less decentralized than originally intended. For example, if you look at Compound DAO, the top 6 voters in Compound DAO own 10% of the total token supply. So we want to improve on-chain identity systems, better understand who is who, and implement more equality-focused voting methodologies like quadratic voting. And then it's also, we want to look at other forms of voting that should replace the current model that allows this kind of governance capture to occur. And how do we remove the current relationship between economic power and governance power? Next is flat hierarchies and leadership. So flat hierarchies is kind of like the end goal of what a DAO tries to be. So this means that you don't want like middle managers and things within a DAO. You want people to have self-autonomy and be able to go out and work on a specific function for the DAO without being told to do so in a traditional hierarchy. But this requires leadership to be present across all contributors at all levels of the organization, and can lead to a lack of responsibility or coherence in organizational level strategy if everyone's kind of doing their own thing. So we want to balance some centralization with leadership structures with a culture of decentralization. So that's trying to minimize those centralizing points where possible, but still allowing that to be done in such a way that you're able to scale the DAO over time. And then we want to also ensure leadership's fluid and not stagnant. So if you do have leadership structures starting to form within a DAO, you need to figure out good ways of allowing top talent to gravitate into those roles and low quality talent to be removed from those roles over time. Two more quick ones on challenges is, first one, resiliency versus scale. There's a constant trade-off between the two that must be addressed by any DAO at all stages of growth. Resiliency being that you want to put more DAO actions to vote to increase the security of the DAO against malicious centralized actors. So again, using the governance attack as an idea, you don't want somebody to be able to just pass proposals easily, right? Or come in and be able to operate without having to be approved by token holders, and then they maliciously steer the DAO away from its original goal. So you want to put more actions to vote. But you also want to place more power in people to execute those decisions to make the DAO move faster, which is scale. If every action is going to a vote, it makes the organization as a whole move really slowly. So you would need to figure out ways to delegate some power, and that's that constant trade-off we were talking about under flat hierarchies as well. So we'll want to build more resilient systems without requiring less scalability if we can. And we want to ask the question, how do we move fast and break things without devolving into chaos or ingrained forms of leadership? And finally, the process of decentralization itself. Decentralizing too early leads to anarchy oftentimes and slows down the product creation process. But it can be an effective tool for bootstrapping a community and getting an initial treasury reserve to operate with. So figuring out when's the right time to go open up to the public and how to move away from some of the existing models for decentralizing, such as airdrops, which can be gamed. All right, now that we have the overview done, let's dive into the specifics on proposal writing. So the governance process, I typically think about it in 6 different phases. So there's the context building phase where you, and for purposes of this example, just imagine that you have a specific thing that you'd like to see done at a DAO. And so initially you'll want to review the forum, interview some key individuals within the DAO, and that might include members of the relevant working group, or just across the DAO as a whole to gauge like a sentiment check on your proposal that you want to work on. And then you'll identify the total scope of your proposal then based off that context building that you're doing. Next would be solicitation phase. So from there, moving on from just the key individuals, you utilize something like Discord or Telegram, wherever those natural conversations are happening in the DAO, to get another form of sentiment check from the community. This one being more broader than maybe the private conversations you would have with the key individuals. Next step is proposal phase. So this is where you'll actually write up the proposal and post it onto the governance forum. From there, you'll solicit feedback from the community in a more formalized setting. So you might get some initial feedback during the context building and solicitation phase, but it might you get a more greater depth of understanding during the actual feedback phase when everyone's able to review the proposal in a more formalized setting. And then it will go to voting, and finally, if it passes voting, it is implemented. So when you're doing the proposal writing, I suggest identifying a specific problem or challenge the DAO is facing and forming a solution to that. Research whether your idea has previously been proposed in the past, and gather that context we were talking about. An example of this being, again, when we were working with Pool Together on the Treasury proposal, there was previously a lot of conversations in the DAO that hadn't been formalized into a proposal. They were either just casual conversations on Discord discussing maybe doing buybacks or changing the tokenomics or how do they increase the prize pool for their protocol. And a few different proposals were passed or done that might be short-term band-aids that doesn't really address the core issue that they were facing. So we identified that, took that, and created a proposal to form a Treasury working group and specifically look at how they could use a different capital structure to increase sponsorship capital and the prize pools that they were dealing with. And being able to refer back to those previous conversations, including that context in the proposal, really helps the DAO as a whole feel more comfortable with what you're doing. They understand that you've looked this, you're not just someone coming in and being like, hey, you guys should do things this way. You actually understand what the DAO needs, and you're trying to solve it appropriately. Then you'll want to understand the governance process for new proposals. Sometimes there's specific templates that they prefer. You want to know if it has to go through multiple votes. Like, for instance, Uniswap has a sentiment check and a temperature check before it goes to like a final vote. So you want to understand that whole process before you post. Also, if there isn't a template, I always just consider this basic format here. So have an abstract summary of what you're working on, the motivation for why you're trying to fix this or the problem you're specifically trying to solve, the details of your solution, and then a request for feedback, sentiment check, or like a poll at the end, just kind of gauging how people feel about the specific proposal you've written out. And if the proposal requires specialized knowledge, try to make it clear for the average person. Try to minimize jargon, provide details, and give examples just so that everyone can get it. Because remember, at the end of the day, not all voters are specialized in the area you might be specialized in, and you need all of their votes to pass something. And then just be sure to continuously follow up. Sometimes things get lost in the forum, so always go back and double check. Cool. And so for some ideas, proposal ideas, there's inter-DAO collaboration and sub-DAO formation. So we talked about that earlier with like the working group structure. So context here is that DAOs are organic cooperatives that interact in unique ways relative to siloed traditional organizations. But finding new and interesting ways for DAOs to coordinate can improve the industry as a whole. And the modular structure of DAOs today means that there's opportunity for service DAOs to specifically come in and operate as extensions of that core DAO. Some ideas here might be mutual cross-DAO collaborations. So for example, in the example proposals, there's a link to the Pool Together rabbit hole quest. That's two different DAOs working together to help onboard users into Pool Together using rabbit hole's interface. The other one, Index Co-op's Incentivized Lending and Borrowing, is working with a lending protocol in DeFi to help incentivize Index Co-op's own structured products. Another idea might be delegated working groups or grants to service DAOs to work on a specific project or vertical. This could be a business development sub-DAO, or say you're a service DAO focused on public relations or treasury management. You come in and request that formal grant from the DAO to do work for the DAO itself. Few examples there. Index Co-op's Business Development Working Group. That's an internal DAO formed working group where members of Index Co-op themselves came in and decided that they were going to form this group and request budgeting. And then there's the Pool Together Forming the Treasury Working Group, which is the one with Llama that we put together, which is an external DAO coming in to say, hey, we should do these things. On the treasury management side, you can always think a common trope is that DAOs are group chats with a shared bank account. And so as such, treasury is kind of like a defining function of a DAO and one of the areas most are trying to improve on. This might mean you come in and propose creating a stablecoin reserve to help get through the bear market, increase the token liquidity to allow other investors to come in and buy larger amounts of the token, acquire governance power in another DAO. So this is called meta governance, and what that would entail is, say, for example, Index Collapse has a ETF-like product that holds Uniswap. Those Uniswap tokens are held in the Index Co-op treasury then, and so they can go out and Index Co-op, the DAO as a whole, can go out and vote in Uniswap's governance with those tokens. So sometimes it's interesting for these collaborations to acquire governance power in different DAOs. And then service DAO-wise, budget and financial reporting is a huge area of need for many DAOs. There's some protocols trying to solve this today, and there's definitely a need just across the space for more transparency around how DAO treasuries are run. Next proposal idea is governance redesigns. So context here is token designs are ever evolving. Changing landscape or community feedback can warrant a modification to tokenomics. We've already seen a shift to more of the delegated voting or the weighted voting models from one token, one vote that was so prevalent over the last couple years. So this changing landscape might warrant some kind of modification there. And similarly, governance processes themselves can be modified to address voter apathy or governance power mismatches, etc. So ideas here might be changing the voting methodology itself, modifying the value capture for token holders, or even a service DAO of professional delegates. So a DAO that acquires governance power in other DAOs and goes to them and then acts as like a professional delegate, and can receive delegation from individuals of that DAO that are apathetic or not interested in necessarily voting. They can delegate their tokens to a service DAO that goes about and actually is an informed voter within the DAO. And then finally, on proposal ideas, don't be afraid to experiment or request a grant for a specific undertaking. There's all kinds of needs in the space, from providing auditing or consulting services, doing creative stuff. So say, like an example might be Meta Factory DAO. They do physical and digital merchandise. And so they oftentimes go around to different DAOs and put forth proposals to, hey, we'll create this wearable for you in like Decentraland, or we'll do this hoodie, physical hoodie for your community. So don't be afraid to kind of go around if you're on the creative side as well, and just figure out ways to engage these different DAOs to help your own specific group work or receive work. You can create an onboarding funnel. HR is also another area that's desperately lacking sometimes in DAOs, helping community members get onboarded and figure out their way around the DAO. That's definitely one of the key areas. And so if you're doing like human resources, or say you're a contributor of Web3 developers, or a DAO of Web3 developers, or any of those types of like service like DAOs, you can go around and help onboard members into those DAOs. And then requesting even hackathon funding or seed investment in your own DAO that you're forming. So you might go to, like, for instance, Rarible DAO has an accelerator. If you're building on Rarible in any way, they might give you money for your specific project that you're working on. So just, yeah, like I said, don't be afraid to experiment. Go out there, kind of figure out ways that you can help different DAOs. There's many different ways today. It always seems like talent is desperately needed in some areas. Like even just like UX and stuff is challenging, Web3 as a whole. So figuring out ways to kind of help, whether that's writing proposals for the DAO itself or forming your own DAO and going around and helping in specific ways, definitely just like get out there and do it. So, yeah, I appreciate the time. I guess I'm not sure if we have time for questions still, but if we do, feel free to drop them in the chat.
So we have time for questions. Does anyone have questions, feedback, comments?
See one person typing. You also hop on voice too if that's easier as well.
I think someone is trying to type something in the chat.
Elaborate on meta governance. Yeah. So I think the basic way of understanding this is think about how you already go around and vote in different DAOs. So all you need is the tokens themselves in your wallet. And then DAOs themselves also have these wallets, usually called multi-sigs or multi-signature wallets. And so there's no difference between a DAO holding a token and you holding those same tokens. So you can go and vote in governance on a DAO, and so can a DAO that holds those tokens. So what's been interesting to see is more DAOs start to engage this way. For instance, I think it was in here actually, or let's see, this Gitcoin Radical Public Goods Alliance one is actually an example of this, where Gitcoin and Radical are swapping tokens with each other in the treasury, and to make each other both have about, I think it was like 10% governance power in each other's DAOs. So it's just kind of like giving the ability to vote in governance in incentive aligned way. And yeah, we've just seen like there's even been like DAOs just kind of dedicated to this, like what's the one, like Wild or Fire Eyes, I think is the name, something like that. But they too are kind of act as like almost professional delegates, where they go around and receive power either by purchasing the tokens themselves or holding the tokens themselves, or having people actually delegate that power over to them. And they become like almost like meta governance politicians in a way, and specialized voters, which helps with some of those core issues we talked about earlier. Hopefully that makes sense. Thanks, Nate. Cool.
Okay, yeah. I think.
Cool. Well, if there's no other questions, I totally appreciate your guys' time. I'm excited for you guys. It's always cool to get new people onboarded into Web3 and start contributing. So, yeah.
Okay, Justin, I don't know if that response was for this question. Can you please elaborate on meta governance? Was that what that response was for?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay, thank you so much, Justin, or Accelerate of 1KX.
Awesome.
Now we've
Have
come
a good one.
Now we've come to the last talk for this 2-day conference. We would like to appreciate everybody that has been in attendance. We would like to appreciate the team, the Codeless conductors, and even you yourself, who is also a Codeless conductor. Please get ready to contribute and stay active in the Discord, so that when we announce the date for the hackathon, you wouldn't miss out. So on that note, is someone trying to make a comment? I can see the chat. So on that note, we would like to bring this session to a close. Thank you so much.